I'm Dr Helena, and after 30 plus years in medical practice, I realised there's a lot missing from modern medicine. Education is more powerful than medication, and our decisions have more impact than our DNA. Today's brain booster is a laugh a day keeps dementia at bay. Imagine you're flipping through old photos with a friend and sharing memories that spark a really hearty, spontaneous laugh. What happens? For a moment, the weight of daily worry seems lighter. Your chest relaxes. You breathe more deeply and you feel connected. You've also given several of your muscles a workout. Laughing contracts our diaphragm, other respiratory muscles, and abdominal muscles to produce that characteristic sound of laughter. And it also engages our facial muscles, specifically, for those geeks who want to know everything, zygomaticus major, which is the cheek muscle responsible for smiling, and it pulls up the corners of your mouth, and orbicularis oculi, the tiny muscles around your eyes. And laughing doesn't just feel good, it does good for our brain and body. Welcome to the science of gelotology, the study of laughter and its physical and psychological effects. Now, why is it called gelotology? Because it comes from the Greek word gelos, meaning laughter. And it turns out that laughter, whether spontaneous, social, or even prescribed via laughter therapy, called none other than gelototherapy, laughter can improve mood. Okay, no surprises there. Reduce stress, anxiety, and depression. Also not so surprising. But, and here's where it gets really interesting, laughter can also build psychological resilience. So you're less likely to get overwhelmed by things and you recover from setbacks more quickly. Laughter lowers blood pressure, strengthens our immune system, and supports brain health. In other words, a laugh a day keeps dementia at bay. A 2025 study assessed the effects of a short-term laughter-based intervention on the mental health and cognitive functions of 25 healthy adults aged 40 to 65. Participants were randomly assigned to watch either a funny video clip or a serious video clip for only 4 minutes. And after the video, they were given 2 tests. One test consisted of counting down from 100 by subtracting 7. So 100, 93, 86, 79, 72, 65. I'd better stop there in case I make a mistake. And the second test was what's known as the Digit Vigilance Test, abbreviated DVT, like deep vein thrombosis, only it stands for Digit Vigilance Test. And here's how the test works. You're given a sheet of paper or a screen with a whole lot of digits randomly arranged in rows. And then you're given a target number, for example, the number 5. And you have to cross out that number every time you see it as quickly and accurately as possible. And to make it even harder, you might be given 2 target numbers at the same time. And in both tests, you're scored on how long it takes you to complete the task and how many mistakes you make, i.e. how many times you missed crossing out the number 5 or how many times you accidentally crossed out the wrong number. And the purpose of the Digit Vigilance Test is to measure your ability to maintain focus and concentration, especially for something monotonous. And it also measures your psychomotor speed, which is how quickly you can visually track and accurately pick something out of a mishmash. So, having gone through the test, both of the tests, the participants were given a break and then they viewed the other video, the video they hadn't watched. So those who'd watched the comedy now watched the serious video, and those who'd watched the serious video now watched the comedy, followed by another test of their concentration and processing speed. So both groups were exposed to both videos in random order to see if their brain worked differently depending on whether they watched something that made them laugh or watched something that merely entertained them without a humorous element. What do you think was the result? After having a good laugh while watching the comedy, and remember this was only for 4 to 5 minutes, people's accuracy and response speeds were significantly higher in both tests compared to when they performed the tests without laughing beforehand. Isn't that remarkable? And it gets even better. Other variables the researchers measured after people watched each of the videos were firstly blood flow to a region of the brain called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and I'll explain what that's about in a minute. Secondly, they measured their heart rate variability, HRV, which I'll also clarify, and chemicals in saliva that indicate a person's stress level. These are known as salivary stress biomarkers, and two examples of these chemicals are cortisol and amylase, alpha amylase to be precise. So why were these things measured? Well, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, abbreviated DLPFC, is a region of the brain responsible for planning, organising, self-control, having a good working memory, and being able to switch tasks without getting confused. So activating this part of our brain enables us to perform complex tasks, and laughter stimulates this part of our brain. Who would have thought? Heart rate variability, meanwhile, is the variation in time between consecutive heartbeats, and it indicates how well a specific part of our nervous system is working, known as the autonomic nervous system, the ANS. And having a higher heart rate variability, so the changes between our heartbeats vary, that's generally associated with better fitness, better health, and quicker recovery, while a lower heart rate variability can be a sign of illness, stress, or overtraining if you're just a marathon runner and just overdoing it. And who would have thought that laughter would have an effect on heart rate variability and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex? But it did. Both heart rate variability and blood flow to the DLPFC were significantly higher after the participants viewed the comedy video compared to the control. They also had lower levels of stress hormones in their saliva. So laughter not only lowers stress, which I think we intrinsically know, it helps us regulate our nervous system and think more effectively. Another study I have to mention, this was an earlier study from 2014. It recruited 20 healthy older adults, half of whom watched self-selected funny videos for 20 minutes, and half of whom just sat calmly for 20 minutes with no stimulation and no mobile phone. I would not have enjoyed being in the second group. And before and after the 20 minutes of laughing or doing nothing, both groups were tested on their short-term memory, delayed recall, and visual recognition. And they also had their salivary cortisol levels measured, which cortisol, you now know, is a stress hormone. And by now, you can probably guess the results. Learning ability in the laughter group improved by 38.5%. Delayed recall, so remembering things that you were told a while ago, improved by 44%. And visual recognition improved by 12.6%. And their salivary cortisol levels went down. Had I known this when I was in medical school, I would have gone out to a comedy club every night instead of sitting at my desk cramming for exams. But wait, there's more. Another experiment recruited 60-plus-year-olds who regularly attended an older person's daycare centre, and just once a week, for 4 weeks, they received laughter therapy, which you now know is called gelototherapy. And in this particular study, the laughter therapy was in the form of watching stand-up comedy. And after just 1 month, they had a significant drop in their blood pressure and heart rate. And what's good for the heart is good for the brain. They had increased levels of serotonin in their blood, one of our feel-good hormones. They felt less depressed. They experienced less bodily pain, i.e., laughter raises our pain threshold or dulls the effect of pain somehow. We think it's because we produce endorphins. They had a reduction in salivary stress biomarkers, and they'd become more active and sociable. These are really big improvements in physical and mental health and in quality of life, just from laughing a bit more. And there's one more fascinating study I have to mention. This was a 3-year study of more than 14,000 men and women aged 65 or older that found the less a person laughed in their day-to-day life, the more likely they were to experience increasing difficulty in performing activities of daily living, like simply getting around, doing the washing, making their bed, and preparing meals. And those who almost never laughed increased their risk of functional disability by nearly 50%. That makes me really sad that not only have they no reason to laugh, but the very fact that they're not laughing reduces their capacity to engage with life. I could go on and on with study after study about the brain and body benefits of laughter, but you get the idea. Laughter wakes up our brain and our ability to function. So today's call to action is up the laughter in your life. Brainstorm ways to get a daily dose of chortles and a spoonful of giggles. Here are just 5 simple ideas to get you started. 1. Dedicate 5 minutes a day to finding jokes or one-liners or hilarious video clips on the internet. Easy. And do it as early as possible in the day so you set yourself up for a good day. Because as you heard from the research I just spoke about, even just 4 minutes of comedy brings brain benefits. Number 2, adopt what I call a mirthful mindset. That's an example of alliteration to help you remember. Mirthful mindset. i.e., be on the lookout for humour in your everyday life. Set the intention of finding something funny every day, and you will. Because what we focus on in our life expands. So the more you do this, the easier it will be to see the funny side of things. 3rd idea, fake it till you feel it. Choose a trigger, something you do every day, like brushing your teeth. And whenever you pick up your toothbrush, laugh out loud. Just do it. And the absurdity of it will make you laugh for real. Or you could laugh whenever you put something in a recycling bin. I know it's ridiculous, but that's the whole point. You know, just me thinking of you, hopefully thousands of you, laughing every time you throw out a piece of paper makes me laugh. In fact, I think I'll adopt that one for myself, especially because I'm a recycling fiend. So I'll be laughing all day long. And you can laugh at the thought of me laughing whenever I recycle something. 4th suggestion, join a laughter yoga club, in person or online. Just Google laughter yoga clubs. Try in your area because it's always better doing things in person. And my final suggestion, number 5, is to spend time with people who make you laugh. Go out to watch comedy together with any friend, a movie, a show, stand-up, whatever you're going to enjoy the most, whatever's easiest to do. Research has shown that we are 30 times more likely to laugh when we're with other people than when we're alone. Because when we see or hear other people laughing or being happy, it can stimulate the release of endorphins and other feel-good neurotransmitters in our own brain. It's a phenomenon known as emotional contagion, and it's mediated by specialized brain cells called mirror neurons. These enable us to empathize with people. And here's the added bonus to all of this. Simply searching for reasons to laugh can improve your mood and boost your brain. Seek, and ye shall find that your brain gets sharper. Today's health headline is, great health is not a distant destination. It's a daily decision. In the previous podcast, I introduced you to the concept of true medicines, an acronym for the foundations and fundamental principles of great health and healing. So how do you start implementing true medicines and embark on the adventure of true healing? Whether you've just received a diagnosis of a major or minor illness, or you don't have a particular disease, but you want to age better physically and mentally, or you want to shed excess body fat, or you just want to improve your overall health. Work your way through each letter of the acronym, True Medicines, and see how it applies to you. And the first 2 letters, T and R, belong together because they stand for take responsibility. The first step to better health and healing is to make the decision to take responsibility for your life. So let's get to grips with what taking responsibility really means. In today's world, conversations about health often revolve around diet, exercise, and medical interventions. And while these elements are undeniably important, they only scratch the surface of what it truly means to take responsibility for our health. To take responsibility in the deepest sense is to recognize that our well-being is not merely something that happens to us. It is something we actively create. And we create it through our thoughts, emotions, beliefs, as well as our actions and habits. It's the understanding, taking responsibility is the understanding that while medical science is a powerful ally, it is not a substitute for the conscious choices we make every day. And when I say this, you're probably thinking, yeah, that's obvious, but I don't see this playing out in life with my patients. Taking responsibility means adopting the mantra that great health is not a distant destination. It's a daily decision. At the same time, taking responsibility is not about perfectionism. It's not about never getting sick or never making mistakes. It's about cultivating a mindset of awareness, empowerment, and intentional action. It's about keeping front of mind that the quality of our lives is directly influenced by the way we treat ourselves, the way we speak to ourselves, the stories we tell ourselves, and the physical, social, and cultural environments we inhabit. So at the heart of taking responsibility for your health and healing lies the fundamental belief that what you do and who you are, all of which I'll expand on, matters. Every choice you make, every bite of food, every thought, and every habit shapes your body, mind, and spirit. Now, don't get all... I don't want people now, the listener, you, to get really nervous and think, you've wrecked everything just by having one negative thought or by beating up on yourself. These things are all normal. It's what we do most of the time that becomes habit, that becomes part of our identity. That's what's going to make the biggest difference. And remember, just because something doesn't come in a pill doesn't mean it isn't powerful. But this is often clouded by a reliance on external systems to fix, in inverted commas, health problems. We leave it to doctors, medications, and procedures to solve issues that so often emerge from patterns of lifestyle, thought, and belief. So, while modern medicine can be a lifesaver, definitely, it is not the ultimate authority on your health. You are. Let me give you a really powerful and recent example of taking responsibility versus not taking responsibility for our health. And it's people's varied approaches to COVID. Some people took a passive approach because that's pretty much what our government told us to do. Unfortunately, it meant they slipped into a state of quiet desperation because all they were doing was waiting for a vaccine and locking themselves up. So inevitably, they drank more alcohol, ate more junk, binged on Netflix, and became depressed. Now, this is not a judgment, it's just an observation that advertising actually teaches us to feel sorry for ourselves and indulge in anaesthetizing behaviours like drinking, eating junk, and being sedentary when external circumstances feel out of our control. And yet other people took an active approach, took responsibility for what they could. And they used lockdowns as an opportunity to strengthen their immune system and their body's resilience to getting COVID in the first place and to cope better if they did get it. For example, they took up home cooking and increased their intake of fresh whole foods. They created a home gym and made exercise a part of their daily routine. They ensured adequate sleep, which is absolutely critical to an optimally functioning immune system. They took up a new hobby or creative pursuit. And they stayed in regular contact with family and friends because loneliness is one of the most destructive agents when it comes to our immunity to disease. So we always have a choice about how we respond to the situation we find ourselves in. Don't wait to be rescued. That's the stuff of fairy tales. Waiting to be rescued by the next big blockbuster drug or medical discovery is not only disempowering on a practical level, it erodes our sense of agency and self-confidence. Because to know that your actions matter is really exciting. Taking responsibility is to realize that while we can't control every factor, genetics, accidents, and increasingly pesticide-infused planet, we can control the most important factors. We can choose our jobs, relationships, attitudes, and perspectives. We can choose what we put into our body and how we treat it. We can choose to move, rest, and recover. And we can choose to fill our lives with joy and laughter. And all these choices fit within the acronym True Medicines in one way or another. Believing in our agency, knowing our agency, is the first and most profound step in taking responsibility for our health. And I'm really labouring the point because In our busy, bustling, burnt-out lives, we pretend that skimping on sleep, eating junk, not exercising, burying our emotions and never switching off don't affect our health, or not to any measurable degree. And then we get a big surprise when we hear the stats that all chronic diseases are on the rise, and we wonder why. I can't get my head around how modern medicine can be so blind, so obtuse, so dumb. There's no other word for it. It's obvious why we're getting sicker and sicker at a younger age. It's obvious why we're tired all the time. It's obvious why we get brain fog every afternoon. Because we eat, drink, argue, stress out, and stomp out our emotions as though none of those things mattered. We also live in a world that bombards us with bad news every day. Wars, murders, floods, landslides, the rising cost of living. All this negativity also hammers our immune system. And another big part of the problem is that often people don't even realise that what they're eating is harmful because of the ubiquity and misleading marketing of processed foods, which is why I'll dedicate many a future podcast to what really constitutes healthy eating. But I'll give you a very quick heads up right now. Drum roll. It doesn't matter if you're vegan, vegetarian, omnivore or carnivore. As long as you eat food that's from the land, from the sea, from the sky or from a tree. Not from a packet, not from a tin. If it comes in a box, I'd throw it in the bin. Of course it is more nuanced than this, but if in doubt, give the product a miss. As I said, more on food in upcoming podcasts. For now, continue to just go through the letters in True Medicines and ask yourself if there is something you can play with. And I deliberately use the word play rather than work because it is play, it is fun, it is exciting. Something you can play with to improve your health. All right, so we've done T and R, take responsibility. U stands for understand that the role of modern medicine is not to heal you, but to keep you alive long enough to give you the opportunity to heal. Modern medicine buys you time to take responsibility for your life and to correct course if needed. So that's the U. E in True stands for examine your BS. B stands for beliefs and S for self-talk. Ask yourself, do I have any beliefs about my health, my illness, myself, that are disempowering? Let's play with an example. Okay, let's say you've just been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and your doctor told you that type 2 diabetes is a chronic, incurable condition, but you can probably manage it reasonably well through lifestyle changes and lifelong medication. Because that's what most doctors, not all doctors, but the majority will tell you. And why wouldn't you believe your doctor? Because your doctor is telling you the limits of their capacity to cure your condition, not the limits of your capacity to cure your condition. And that goes for any condition that a doctor tells you is incurable. They're describing their limits, not yours. Believing that type 2 diabetes is incurable is a limiting belief because it precludes the possibility that you can cure it and live a diabetes-free life, which you can, and which you'll discover how to do over the course of this podcast. So it's not that you don't believe in your doctor, it's about recognizing that your doctor and the medical profession have limitations. And where modern medicine stops is where you start. Simply open yourself to the possibility that type 2 diabetes or any other disease, even a life-threatening one, might be amenable to a different approach from that which your doctor is offering you. And that's what this podcast is about, a different approach. But at this point, I'm merely asking you to open yourself to the potential of healing what modern medicine deems to be incurable or irreversible. And to do that, you need to examine your self-talk around the issue. Some examples, and these are all things I've heard from patients and friends. I'm addicted to sugar. I'll never be able to follow the eating plan the doctor recommended. I could never give up eating cereal for breakfast. I've eaten it all my life. I have no willpower. I'm not sporty. And I've never been able to stick to an exercise program. I just don't like moving. Between my job, my children, and my elderly parents, I have absolutely no time to look after myself. These are all statements I've heard from patients, and none of these thoughts are serving you. So let's weaken their hold on you. When you examine your self-talk and you uncover a limiting belief, make just 2 small changes. Add the words, "I believe that" at the start of the sentence, and add, "but this could change" at the end of the sentence. So try these on for size. I believe that I'm addicted to sugar, and I'll never be able to follow the eating plan the doctor recommended. But this could change, even though at this point I don't see how. You can add, even though at this point I don't see how, if it makes it easier for you to get your head around the new attitude. Another one. I believe that I could never give up eating cereal for breakfast, but this could change. I believe that I have no willpower, but this could change. I believe that I'm not sporty and I've never been able to stick to an exercise program, but this could change. I believe that between my job, my children, and my elderly parents, patients too, I have absolutely no time to look after myself. But this could change, even though at this point, I really don't see how. Remember what Albert Einstein said. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And what Einstein was saying is that a shift in thinking, a new approach, is necessary to solve problems and overcome challenges. Clinging to the mindset that led to the illness will not bring about its cure. So your patterns of thinking need to change. And that means you also need to look at general themes and patterns in your self-talk. So ask yourself the following probing questions and see what comes up for you. Does my self-talk reflect high or low self-respect? Do I have a strong sense of self-respect? Would I talk to others the way I talk to myself? Is there a specific area of my life in which I'm not respecting myself? For example, in relation to my food choices. Am I consistently putting unhealthy food into my body? Or the way I spend my time? Am I doing everything for others and next to nothing for myself? Do I allow other people or a specific person to speak to me in a way that I consider disrespectful? But I don't stand up for myself because I don't want to deal with the consequences, or I just don't have the energy to deal with the consequences. Is there an area of my life in which my self-esteem is being eroded? Is there an area of my life in which I'm sabotaging myself? Do I see myself as sickly, outspoken, or victimized? Your answers to these questions are really important because they'll start to build a picture of your self-talk, your self-respect, your self-sabotage, and ultimately your self-image. And your self-image rules. You can't behave in a way that isn't in alignment with your self-image. All of these things play a huge role in your physical, mental, and emotional health. And if your self-image isn't serving you, are you willing to change it? Or, and this is going to cut deep and push a few buttons perhaps, does a negative self-image confer secondary gains you are not willing to give up? Sit with that one for a while. It's not a conscious thing. We don't do that consciously. We often do it unconsciously, and it's often replaying patterns from our childhood. It's a big one. It's one big rabbit hole for you to reflect on, and which I will delve into at a later date. So the S in Examine Your BS cuts really deep. It stands not only for self-talk, but all those things that your self-talk creates or undermines. So S also stands for self-respect, self-esteem, self-sabotage, and ultimately self-image. And we will untangle all of these issues in future podcasts. Right now, in these early podcasts, I just want to plant some seeds. So for now, this is an exploratory exercise for you to get a sense of what is driving your life and your health, for you to get a sense of the subconscious programs that might be running your life, the undercurrent of why you feel flat, fatigued, or fall prey to food cravings. So that's a brief look at the TRUE part of the acronym, True Medicines. Now let's move on to the medicines part of the acronym. And I won't go through all of them. I'll just give you some examples to get you started. M stands for meaning and purpose. Here you might want to ask yourself, am I living in a way that is truly meaningful to me? Not my partner, parents, or children, but to me. Do I have a sense of purpose? And it doesn't have to be curing cancer or, creating world peace. It's something that gives you purpose. Even growing a beautiful garden. Am I living in alignment with my values? Am I living authentically? Is there any area of my life in which my sense of self is being eroded, and only you know what that means. On the surface, I might seem happy, but am I really? Have I submerged a deep longing to do something creative? Am I being true to myself? Or am I burying my deep-seated desires because deep down I don't believe I deserve them? If your answer is all good on those counts, move on to the next principle, the next letter in the acronym. If your answer is, I'm content enough, but explore the but and see where it takes you. At this stage of your healing, you don't have to come up with all the answers. You're just gaining awareness that there might be more to your illness or to your suboptimal state of health than meets the eye. The E in medicines stands for the obvious, exercise. I could do an entire podcast series, like for the rest of my life, talking about how incredible exercise is for our brain and body. But for now, just ask yourself, am I getting an average of at least 30 minutes of moderate to vigorous aerobic exercise on most days of the week? Aerobic exercise means walking, jogging, cycling, swimming, rowing, dancing, anything that makes you breathless. And moderate means that if you have a piece of music playing, you are too breathless to sing along with the music, but not too breathless to carry on a slow conversation with someone. Vigorous level activity means that you are too breathless to even get a word out. Equally important question, am I doing some form of strength training at least twice a week? Strength training, also referred to as resistance training, means lifting weights, using resistance machines, or using your own body weight to strengthen your muscles. We don't get weak as we get old. We get old if we allow ourselves to get weak. And trust me, this will be a whole other podcast topic. The next exercise question, can I balance? Can I stand on one leg for 60 seconds with my eyes closed? Am I doing at least a few minutes of stretching or yoga poses every day? And am I spending more than 4 hours a day sitting down? As I said, I'll do a whole series of podcasts on how movement is truly medicine in so many different ways, and on how important it is to move on a regular basis to maintain our physical, mental, and emotional health. But for now, just assess where you're at in terms of incorporating movement into your life. D in medicines stands for diet. And this is an absolute minefield of a topic. So again, at this stage, just ask yourself 3 questions. 1, does my diet consist mostly of whole, real food that I either eat raw or cook at home using natural, could be fresh or dried, herbs and spices? Or does most of what I eat come out of a box, packet, tin or takeaway container? In other words, do I eat more real food or processed food? And a second question, just trust your intuition. Am I eating foods that heal or foods that harm? The fewer chemicals, numbers, and unpronounceable ingredients that you eat, the better your health. We'll discuss this in great detail in many a future podcast. Can you see where this is going? Run through each letter, each principle in true medicines, and ask yourself how it might relate to your health issue. And if nothing comes up for you, which would be unlikely, but if you truly feel that your diet, exercise, sleep, stress management, relationships, and job couldn't be any better, then it brings us to what's missing from modern medicine. What's missing from modern medicine is the recognition, and I'm a bit nervous to say this because it's just going to set off a whole lot of thoughts and doubts in people's minds, but I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway. What's missing from modern medicine is the recognition that we are spiritual beings in a physical body. Now, this isn't as unscientific and out there as it sounds, because it's not about religion or the practice of any particular faith. That is not what I'm talking about. Spirituality is not a belief. Spirituality is the capacity to perceive that you are more than your physical body, that you are connected to something greater than yourself, and that you have access to power beyond that which we can measure in the physical realm. And research shows that feeling in some way connected to a universal life force or a higher power something beyond the physical, beyond what our five senses can perceive. In other words, conceiving oneself as a spiritual being in a physical body correlates with better outcomes for people diagnosed with serious illnesses. Let me put it another way. We are not our thoughts. We are the observer of our thoughts. Think about that. We are not our feelings. We are the observer of our feelings. And that observer is our spirit, soul, consciousness, whatever you choose to call it. And studies have demonstrated that when someone is facing a life-threatening illness like advanced cancer, their psychological, emotional, and spiritual resources are more important than the medical interventions they undergo. And empirical evidence shows that spirituality, remember, defined broadly as feeling we are connected to something greater than our individual self, not necessarily anything to do with organized religion, but it can be. Feeling that there is a higher animating power that we can draw on plays a crucial role in helping patients cope, adjust, and heal. In fact, the US National Cancer Institute, so this is a seriously conservative body, notes that religious and spiritual coping are associated with less anxiety, less social isolation, and less feeling hostile and why me and angry. Also, it's associated with greater life satisfaction, a greater sense of meaning, and more optimism. And all these factors help mitigate the physical and emotional burden of cancer and its treatment. And I'll actually give you references to these studies in the show notes. In one study of cancer patients, participants described their spiritual and religious practices as empowering because it helped them move from stages of despair and powerlessness to hope, to active engagement with their illness, i.e. taking responsibility, and a sense of control over its management. So spirituality gives us the ability to reinterpret illness in a broader, more hopeful and more empowering context. Because if we're part of a spiritual dimension as well as a physical dimension, we have more resources to draw on. If we have a foot in each dimension, the physical and the spiritual, we can draw on resources from both of them. So it's not as if physical things don't matter, because they do. We live in a physical world that follows physical laws. What we eat matters. How much we move matters. Whether we get enough sleep matters, but they're not the only things that matter. Our inner life also matters. A person can appear to be doing everything right on a physical level, eating well, exercising regularly, getting good sleep, but if they're not fulfilling a yearning for a deeper connection to something greater than themselves, that's also a form of conflict with a spiritual need. And it's by recognizing that I'm part of a bigger picture, recognizing that my inner world is bigger than my outer world, awakening to my spirituality, that gives me access to the life force that animated me. And when I say awakening to my spirituality, it doesn't need to be more complicated than simply realizing I'm more than my physical body. And that's why my thoughts, feelings, and beliefs have such a profound effect on my physical health. And the way to gain access to this healing life force is to remove conflict from our life. How amazing is that? We have access to an infinite healing life force as long as we're not living in conflict with ourselves, with our needs, with our fellow humans, and with life. And that includes not fighting your disease, but following your disease. What do I mean by that? Don't fight your disease, follow your disease to a deeper appreciation of life. Recall podcast number 3, my previous podcast, where I spoke about changing the language of medicine from the language of war to the language of love. Let go of your resistance to whatever disease, health challenge you're facing, and allow it to show you how to heal. Become curious rather than critical. Let that become another mantra. I just find that is such a powerful one in any area of my life. I just go, okay, how can I be curious rather than critical here? Let go of negative judgments about having an illness. That's the power of being curious. Go back to my original proposition in podcast number 1, that disease is a doorway to truth, growth, wisdom, freedom. This is a challenge to explain because in a sense it is actually inexplicable. So come back to my original proposition that all disease is caused by conflict. But it isn't just conflict on a physical level, it's also conflict with our true nature. Our true nature being the recognition that we are connected to everyone and everything. The other problem is not recognizing that we're part of a bigger picture, because that bigger picture empowers us to heal. And here's the really, really neat thing. If you don't like the idea of bringing spirituality into healing, true medicines, putting into practice each element of the acronym, will still work for you, because all the principles of true medicines are doorways to connecting with your spiritual self, whether you have a sense of your spirit, soul, higher self or not. True medicines removes all the conflicts in your life. How great is that? Because eating well is symbolic of respecting your body, which is symbolic of respecting life. And that respect for life allows you to tap into the healing force that animates all living things. Likewise, moving your body is also symbolic of respecting your body and respecting the life, the force that gave you life, which allows you to channel that force into healing. Spending time in nature connects us with the life force. Laughter and positive emotions connect us with the life force. So whatever you do, even the smallest step towards caring for your body works on both a physical and spiritual level to move you towards healing. Which brings me to this week's weather report. Today's weather report comes from Sandra at Lennox Heads, New South Wales, Australia.
I wonder whether you aren't giving people false hope. There are many diseases, especially psychiatric and neurological ones like schizophrenia, MS, dementia and Parkinson's, that are not curable. Maybe one day they will be, but for now they can only be managed with lifelong medication and psychotherapy. With consistent treatment, I know many people can manage their symptoms, reduce relapses and lead productive lives. But you seem to be suggesting that we can cure these conditions. I wonder whether this isn't an unrealistic message.
I believe there is no such thing as false hope, because the future is never predictable. And this is really important, because hope itself plays a meaningful role, a really big role, in shaping outcomes. So what I'm in fact trying to do is to reverse the false hopelessness offered by modern medicine when it comes to psychiatric, well, certainly the psychiatric and neurological diseases you listed. Because as you say, schizophrenia, MS, multiple sclerosis, dementia and Parkinson's, medical dogma states that these conditions are a lifelong sentence, and a life-shortening one at that. But there's been tremendous progress in terms of changing the trajectory of those diseases, and in many cases, reversing them. Just as an example, look up the work of Dr. Christopher Palmer and Dr. Georgia Eade in using metabolic therapies to treat mental illness. They have cured so many conditions that were once thought incurable. And look up Dr. Matthew Phillips and Dr. Dale Bredesen for their revolutionary treatment of neurological conditions, including Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. I won't go into those details now because that wasn't your question, but in future podcasts I will. I just want to make the point that if a patient is told that their condition is incurable, they are much less likely to be proactive about their health. They are much less likely to look at what they can do for themselves, in addition to whatever prescription medications they might be taking. And that passivity worsens their prognosis. Another mantra for you: passivity worsens prognosis. So in my opinion, the concept of false hope is totally misleading. Hope is hope. It's not a guarantee. It's a window of possibility. And as such, hope is actually one of the most powerful forces in the human experience. I don't think there's anywhere that hope is more fiercely tested and more easily questioned than when confronting what modern medicine labels an incurable illness. People facing serious diagnoses are often warned against holding on to false hope. But when we examine science, human biology, and lived experience closely, we discover that there is no such thing as false hope. This is not a call to deny medical reality or to promise that every illness can be reversed. But hope is an invitation to understand that outcomes are far more nuanced, biology is far more adaptive and adaptable, and healing is far more complex than the simple binary concept of curable versus incurable. Hope is also an expression of humility because it acknowledges that we don't yet know the limits of human capability. And in answer to your question about, am I being unrealistic? For science to progress, we have to think beyond what is currently possible. We have to be unrealistic. If we didn't hope that things could get better, we'd never try for a better world. We'd never try for a better treatment. We'd never try for a cure. Just to finish, let me give you some really concrete reasons, I think, why the term false hope should be abolished. Firstly, across many different diseases, cancers, autoimmune conditions, neurological illnesses, there have been documented cases of spontaneous remissions, even in the most conservative and prestigious medical journals. The Lancet Oncology, the British Journal of Cancer. They record melanomas, lymphomas, kidney cancers that just disappeared without modern medicine being able to explain why. But instead of doing a deep dive into what the patient might have done to help themselves, the cases were just dismissed as anomalies. Modern medicine needs to be intensely curious about these cases, not forget about them, because the lesson is that medical predictions describe what is statistically probable, not what is universally true. Spontaneous remissions challenge the boundaries of medical prediction. If something is real, even if it's rare, it is possible, and hope is not false. And by the way, spontaneous remissions occur far more than we realize. It's just that they're not being talked about or reported because there's no explanation for them. Secondly, the human body is a living system. It's constantly working to restore balance and to heal itself, because our natural state is to be healthy, is to be disease-free, is to be full of energy and vitality. Our job is to get out of our own way, to stop putting up barriers to healing, such as losing hope and leading a stressful life. But if we removed all the barriers, we would be healthy. And the other important thing is that scientific advances in neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to rewire itself, advances in immunotherapy, which is harnessing the immune system to fight cancer, and epigenetics, which is an amazing topic which I will cover later. Epigenetics is how environment and behavior influence gene expression. Just these three sciences have overturned long-held assumptions about permanence and prognosis. Research published in Nature Reviews Neuroscience, for instance, documents how patients with brain injuries regained functions once thought to be permanently lost. So that's an example of how neuroplasticity has changed the face of healing. Meanwhile, breakthroughs in immunotherapy have led to long-term remissions in patients who had exhausted all conventional options, and for whom remission would have been deemed impossible even just a few decades ago. So even the most conventional healthcare is not a fixed entity. It's a rapidly advancing frontier. What is incurable today may be curable tomorrow, like literally tomorrow. Conditions once uniformly fatal, like certain childhood leukemias, HIV/AIDS, various cancers, are now treatable and in many cases curable. There are even cases of people living long enough to benefit from a breakthrough that didn't exist when they were diagnosed. How neat is that? So warning people not to cling to false hope turned out to be false advice. And what I most dislike about the term false hope is that it assumes the future is knowable and static, which is complete nonsense. Everything is changing from one minute to the next. And that fact alone gives hope for anything. And really importantly, everyone is unique. You are an individual. Medical prognoses are based on population data, how big groups of people with similar conditions tend to fare over time. But every person has their own genetics, biology, environment, habits, and support systems. That means statistics describe the average, not the individual. And even when a doctor gives a patient an estimated timeline, it's actually rarely a precise prediction. I know so many people who surprise their doctor by outliving their prognosis by years. So, here's 2 more mantras for you. A prognosis is not a prophecy, and a diagnosis is not a destination. And finally, hope is often dismissed as emotional fluff. But if you've listened to my previous podcasts, you'll know that emotional stuff is definitely not fluff. Mind and body are not separate. Our psychological state influences our physical state, and vice versa. Research has shown that having positive expectations, aka hope, reduces stress hormones, enhances immune function, reduces our perception of pain, and strengthens our resilience. Sounds a lot like the benefits of laughter, doesn't it? In fact, it is. Studies published in Psychosomatic Medicine and the Journal of Behavioural Medicine show that patients with a hopeful outlook, not those who fake it till they make it. Now, let me point out that you can fake it till you feel it with laughter, but not with hope, not with genuine feelings. Because laughter is more of an action, and then you can make yourself feel like laughing. But you can't force yourself to hope or to be optimistic or to feel joy. That you have to genuinely cultivate, genuinely find things that make you feel that way. So as I was saying, studies have shown that patients with that hopeful outlet, not those who fake it till they make it, not those who put on a brave face for others, but people who are genuinely optimistic, they do better than someone with the same diagnosis who is in a state of despair or who suppresses their emotions. So, hope supports emotional well-being, hope fosters stronger bonds with others, and it helps people participate in life despite uncertainty. Hope doesn't deny reality. Hope expands reality. Please note that this podcast is for general information purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice and is not intended to provide specific guidance for any particular situation. The use of this information is at the viewer and listener's own risk and is not a substitute for consulting a healthcare provider.